Let's talk about winters in Chicago. The city is famous for its freezing weather, but there's something magical about its beauty during this time. Snow covers the streets, and the lights twinkle in the cold nights. But with this beauty comes a dark side, thick fogs that blanket the roads and make the city look eerie. But what if that fog wasn't just fog? What if it brought something darker, something terrifying? Today's story is about Ethan, Sarah, and Ryan, three friends who wanted a break from the city's chaos. They planned a trip that would change their lives forever. Ethan, the adventurous one, convinced his friends to go on a road trip to Colorado for a weekend getaway. The plan was simple: rent a car, leave early in the morning, and drive through the scenic countryside. Their driver, Tom, was a cheerful man in his mid-40s. He loved to joke and tell stories, and within an hour, he had all three of them laughing. The group left Chicago at 4 a.m. The cold air bit at their skin as they loaded their bags into the car, but the excitement of the trip kept them warm. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. As the sun tried to rise around 8 a.m., a strange fog started to creep in. At first, it was just a light mist, but soon, it thickened until they could barely see the road ahead. The trees lining the highway seemed to disappear into a white void. Tom, the driver, suddenly became quiet. His cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by a tense, worried expression. "Something wrong, Tom?" Ethan asked from the back seat. Tom hesitated, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I need you all to listen to me carefully," he said. "Whatever you do, don't roll down the windows. Not even a crack. And don't leave the car unless I say so. Do you understand?" The friends exchanged confused looks. "Why?" Ryan asked. Tom's voice dropped to a whisper. "This fog, it's not normal. This area isn't supposed to have fog like this. When it appears, it means something's out there. Something dangerous." Ethan chuckled nervously. "You're kidding, right? Trying to scare us for fun?" Tom didn't laugh. "I'm serious," he said. "This fog, it has a way of playing tricks on people. Just promise me you'll keep the windows shut." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Hey, sure. Whatever you say, Tom." The car entered the fog completely. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. It wasn't just thick, it seemed alive. The way it moved, swirling and curling around the car, felt unnatural. The world outside disappeared. They could no longer see the road, the trees, or even the sun. It was as if they were driving through a void. "I don't like this," Sarah muttered, hugging her jacket closer. Tom said nothing. His knuckles were white as he gripped the wheel. Minutes passed in tense silence until Sarah began to feel strange. Her chest tightened, and it felt like the air in the car was suffocating her. "I can't breathe," she said, gasping. "I need fresh air." "Sarah, don't!" Tom shouted. But Sarah panicked. She reached for the window and rolled it down just a crack. Instantly, the fog poured in like a living thing, curling around her face. She took a deep breath, but instead of relief, her expression froze in terror. "What is it?" Ethan shouted, shaking her. Sarah turned to look at him, but her eyes were wide with fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Then, without warning, she screamed, a blood-curdling sound that echoed in the enclosed car. Ethan and Ryan tried to calm Sarah down, but then the unthinkable happened. The car, which had felt cramped just moments ago, suddenly felt empty. Ethan looked around. "Where's Tom?" he asked. Ryan's face went pale. "He was just here. I swear he was just here." The driver's seat was empty. Tom was gone. Before they could process what was happening, the fog inside the car began to thicken. It felt heavy and cold, pressing against their skin. And then Ryan vanished. "Ryan?" Ethan shouted. He turned to Sarah, but she was gone too. Ethan was alone. While Ethan was left alone in the car, Sarah found herself outside, standing in the fog. She couldn't remember how she got there. "Ethan? Ryan?" she called out, but her voice seemed swallowed by the fog. She saw a figure in the distance, a tall, dark shadow. At first, she thought it was a person. "Hello? Can you help me?" But as she moved closer, the figure didn't become clearer. It remained a blurry, menacing shape. Sarah stopped. The air around her grew colder. She realized the shadow wasn't standing still, it was moving toward her. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like lead. The shadow grew taller, stretching to an impossible height. And then it spoke. A low, guttural voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You shouldn't have opened the window." Back in the car, Ethan fought the rising panic. He didn't know where his friends were or how to get out of the fog. Desperate, he grabbed the steering wheel and started driving. He couldn't see the road, but he didn't care. He had to get out of there. As he drove, the fog outside grew darker. Shapes began to appear, twisted, humanoid figures that seemed to watch him from the edges of the mist. Ethan refused to stop. "You're not real," he muttered to himself. "This isn't real." But then, a figure appeared directly in front of the car. It was a woman, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She looked exactly like Sarah. Ethan slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car hit her with a sickening thud. Ethan jumped out of the car, his heart racing. He ran to the woman's body, but when he turned her over, he froze. It was Sarah. She was covered in blood, her eyes staring lifelessly at the sky. "How? Is this possible?" Ethan whispered. He stumbled back toward the car, but when he opened the door, it was empty. The seats were torn, and the inside was covered in frost. The fog grew thicker, and the shadowy figures closed in. Ethan could feel their eyes on him, their presence pressing down on his chest. A voice whispered in his ear, low and mocking, "You can't escape." The next morning, a highway patrol officer found the car crashed into a tree. Inside were Ethan, Sarah, Ryan, and Tom. All of them were alive, but barely. Ethan had a severe head injury and was mumbling incoherently. Sarah was catatonic, her eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Ryan wouldn't stop shaking, and Tom refused to speak at all. When the officer asked what had happened, none of them could give a clear answer. Locals later claimed that the stretch of highway they had driven through was cursed. Stories of tall, shadowy figures and mysterious fogs had been told for decades. Some say the fog is a doorway to another world, a place where the rules of reality don't apply. So, the next time you drive through thick fog, remember, keep your windows shut, and whatever you do, don't stop. If you enjoyed this story and want more terrifying tales, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Mr. Dreadmare.